Welcome to the AI First Business Podcast with Tina Yazdi, where we show you how companies, teams, and leaders are turning AI hype into ROI.
Hi, Steve. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome.
How you doing?
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Tell me about those early days anyway. Like, what are the kind of, it must be mad. It must have been crazy, right? Those early days at GoCardless.
Yeah, it was. I mean, especially for me. So I just for context, I joined a startup that I was working for in Paris, and I had to move to London, which was completely new city. First time I was in a full English speaking environment.
Yeah.
But back then, like all the floors were kind of empty, and it wasn't good looking. It wasn't a nice office. And yeah, we had a lot of fun there. So it's just very, very different environment. I mean, there was no coffee shops in Shoreditch.
Right. So got you on the podcast today because we want to talk a little bit more about what you're doing with Duffel. You guys have raised 50 million, and for a UK-based travel platform company that was launched in 2017. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about Duffel?
Yeah, very happy to. We started the company about 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago now. We do APIs for searching, booking, and managing flights, and later other travel inventory, but very focused on flights today.
Okay, awesome. We'll dive into that a little bit more later in the podcast. But what I really want to start with, and the reason that we got you today, was to talk a little bit more about those early days at GoCardless. A lot of people tout it as the kind of GoCardless mafia, and a lot of the people that were there to begin with have obviously gone on to found some of the UK's largest companies, including Nested, Monzo, etc., Permutive, and more. I'll start with the formative years, if you don't mind. So it'd be great to dive into what was young Steve, what was little Steve like? Where were you born? What was your childhood like?
So I was born in a city an hour away from Paris in France called Chartres. I mean, just like any kid, really playing a lot of Legos, loving outdoors, lots of cycling, playing with weapons and, like plastic weapons and stuff. And it's only much later on that I got exposed to computers and what made me want to pursue a career in software engineering.
The really interesting part is generally what you find is those kids that had played with Lego when they were younger generally tend to get into kind of more engineering, product design, etc. Was there any particular influence in your childhood that you felt got you into engineering?
I can't remember how it was called exactly, but Lego had done this series called Mindtronics, something.
Yeah.
There was a mix of electronic. You could buy controllers and servo motors and like a bunch of other things to build robots and whatnot. And I definitely got really hooked into that stuff. I think at some Christmas I got R2D2 model in Lego, but you could make it move around, control it and program it on the computer, and then graduated to electronic. And I remember getting this little board where you could start playing with LEDs and all of these like electronic components, resistance. So that was a lot of fun. And I think it definitely got me hooked into electronics and computer and programming, and eventually led to me wanting to do that more.
And then you've got that kind of engineering side of you that obviously, it seems like it kind of sprouted from Lego, and then there was other creative things, as you said, like the electronics board, etc. But then you've got that other side of you, which is the business side. And generally you find it quite rare that you have someone that is an engineer, but also has kind of entrepreneurial capabilities or is interested in entrepreneurship. What led you to entrepreneurship? Have you always wanted to start a company?
I've definitely wanted that for a while, but I don't think the idea was as matured as, I wanted to start a company. I've always wanted to start things and do things and bring people together to start projects or stuff. So I think my first foray into company building was back when I was 15 years old or something. I used to play basketball a lot back then and still do occasionally, but back then I would be every day on the court, and I had a bunch of friends and we would play. And eventually I wanted to do something bigger, and I told myself that we would create a massive tournament, a street ball tournament, and bring people to the city I was living in. And in order to do that, I had to create some sort of a non-profit. We have this in France, association. And because I was a minor at the time, I couldn't do it. But there is this there is this other non-profit in France, which was called Junior Association. So it was a non-profit that helped minors set up their own organization so that they can get a taste of what it is to run like a company or a non-profit in that case. And so I reached out to them and said, hey, I have this idea and I'd like to structure it and create, but you need to help me because I can't on my own. And then started on the organization of that streetball tournament, which instead of attracting people from all around France, attracted people from the region of France, which was already quite good, but we didn't manage to get people to travel for an unknown tournament. Actually, with that non-profit, it led to a lot of other things because then we opened up a music studio. So I got a grant from the government, which seemed, like a ridiculous amount now, but we got 1,000 euros, I think, from the government to buy studio equipment. And then we set up a little home studio in my neighborhood, and we would record local artists. And we also had a failed attempt at trying to set up a streetwear fashion brand that would kind of go with the tournament and the studio. So I definitely had that mindset already back then, but it evolved quite a lot over time.
Some of the things that you said there demonstrates a huge amount of kind of hustle and graft. I guess you had to cold call. There'd be various things that you had to do to actually get into those conversations. What was the motivation behind all of those things? Because obviously you wanted to set up the basketball tournament. You wanted to set up a fashion brand as well. What is the underlying motivation?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I have the answer even today. If I had to formulate an answer now, I would say it's all about curiosity and learning to a certain extent. When I heard that it wasn't possible for minors to do it, I was like, there has to be a solution. And then, you find the internet is really powerful for kind of helping you figure out the edge cases, the people that kind of worked around the system and managed to find a way to do something that you thought wasn't possible. And once I know it's possible and the internet helps me in figuring it out, then I have that hustle that you just talked about, I think. But I love creating stuff and bringing people along. And that's the motivation.
It sounds like one of the big things here, like one of the big trends is you like fixing problems, right? For example, you couldn't figure out how to do this for juniors, so you went to the mayor and tried to kind of figure out a way of doing that. When you were younger, you obviously played with Lego bricks, etc., to kind of create things and design things. It sounds like there's something around solving problems, which is kind of quite common with entrepreneurs.
Yeah, building to solve a problem is maybe is the common thread in all of this.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And talking about building, smooth way to move on. GoCardless. You were at the very early stages of GoCardless, right? So I think you joined the company around 2012. And that was just 1 year after GoCardless had been started at Y Combinator, a famous incubator in San Francisco, by Hiroki, Matt, and Tom, as group pay. After they'd gone through that, they'd come back to the UK. I think they raised a little bit of money from Axel. And you had started in 2012. It would be great to find out a little bit more about those early days. It would be interesting to learn a little bit more about how you even came about the opportunity.
Yes, so I joined GoCardless December 2012. I initially found out about the opportunity on Hacker News. If they were looking for a front-end engineer in London, and I thought, why not? So I just dropped an email to Hiroki, was the contact at the time for that role. Yeah, one thing led to another. Ended up joining. Back then I was working for a startup in Paris, and I was doing advertising technology. So I'd been there for a little while. I joined them as the first engineer. After the company had slightly pivoted from music to advertising, we had developed an advertising tech that would kind of expand out of the ad space that you had. And that was, now it's quite commonplace, and there's a lot of these, massive pop-up models that just come into your face. But back when we were doing it, there wasn't a lot of companies doing it, and I just felt like I was stalling a little bit, and I had views to go to the US, and I'd interviewed with a few companies in the US, girlfriend at the time, and I had to make a choice because it seemed like there was a lot of complications with going to the US, and so I started looking at London and the UK a bit more, and got approached by recruiters for a company in Brighton. And yeah, I think it's during that time that I saw the GoCardless job offer, and I got into the interview process, which again, I mean, we were discussing before starting that. At that point, my accent was very rough, so the interview process was a whole ordeal. I remember doing this technical video interview where, in my eyes, there was like 5 people or 6 people on the other end of the phone. Maybe it wasn't the case, but I just remember it being like very stressful, 1 hour answering technical questions. And then I had to do a take-home test, and eventually went to interview in London. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. The company was quite small. I think maybe like 10 to 12 people, something like that.
And you talk about wanting to go to the US and the UK. Just digging into that a little bit deeper. What was the reason for wanting to go US or UK as well?
Again, like we kind of come back, like, I've spent so much time on the internet, and so I had discovered Y Combinator and Hacker News, and I from a distance knew what was happening in Silicon Valley. I was like very lucky that I joined my first job after my computer science degree, which actually, when I dropped off in my first year, so I can't really say I like did the degree, but my first job was in a startup in Paris, initially as an intern in between my first and second year, and then I dropped out and ended up joining the company full time.
So you dropped out of university for an opportunity at a startup in France, which some would say is quite risky, but at the same time you're quite young. So there must have been some kind of motivation behind that. What was the reason?
So when I was in France, I finished my bac, which I guess is the equivalent of A levels maybe here, or GCSE, and then decided to do a degree, which was it was called Science of Communication Network. Essentially, it was a mix of coding, design, and then communication and media. I loved especially the coding part and not so much the other 2 parts. And I started, like, it was university, and I didn't go to all the classes. And eventually the university people came to me and said, oh, like, you have to go to all the classes. After they've given me one warning also, that saying like I need to go to more classes, I also found this opportunity. There was an exchange program between my university and a university in the US. I was like, oh, like, wouldn't it be great to go to the US and study there for a year? And so they told me, if you want to go to the US, you have to do another year at school. And I was like, there's no way. I had to do the first year again. I ended up dropping out, or like leaving this course, and then joining a full-on computer science degree in a private school in France. It's a school called Supinfo, so it was quite popular at the time. And I did the first year there, and then got an internship. It was 2009, and it was just my first job. And you go, and it's typical startup environment. This is like, that's the only thing I want. And I also knew that all the good companies, which has an amazing engineering talent, were all in the US. At least that was my perception at the time. So I was thinking, I want to do that, but I want to do that at Facebook or Google or any of these big companies. And that, I guess, that's when I started looking more into the US. Well, I went back for like a month, and then the CEO of the company reached out saying, hey, do you want to work for us? We have an opening, and we kind of like you during the summer. So I ended up dropping out of school and just working for these guys.
Awesome. You've got such an interesting story. And I hear a lot of the time that entrepreneurs, or people that generally have the engineers as well, they generally do. There seems to be a trend of dropping out in the first year, unless that's just what the kind of media is depicting anyway. So it's a really interesting kind of roundabout journey of how you got to GoCardless. Going back to GoCardless, so you mentioned you started there. There were 12 people. You had some, individuals that we would call legends in the kind of UK fintech space today, like Tom and Hiroki, right? And then you have Matt that's gone on to start Nested as well. Like, what was it like working in that environment early days?
The density of talent was phenomenal. Like, I was definitely the dumbest person in the room. Everybody was like super smart and at the top of their game, cared a lot about their craft. Everybody worked really, really hard. And it was a phenomenal environment to be in. Yeah, got very lucky.
What would you say when you were there was the kind of number one thing that you learned when you were working with all of these A players, right? One room, in a kind of like a boiler room environment, 12 of you cracking it out. What was the one big thing you learned?
I think the one big takeaway for me was how people around me and managed to break through walls by just not taking no for an answer and always finding, even when we were doing something that was quite complex, if you, from a, setting up the business perspective, there was regulatory constraints and you have to do partnerships with companies or payments providers that, I mean, we didn't know, at least the team I joined after that was done, but the team didn't even really know who to work with. And our first bank partnership was with RBS, if I remember correctly. And I think it was quite an ordeal to get it set up and going. The early team just like didn't give up, and they always figured out, there's always a checklist of things that you can tick the box and eventually you get to the outcome you want. Yeah. And so I think a lot of people tend to focus on, the big picture of like what you're trying to achieve, and they often you find it overwhelming. So in the case of GoCardless, starting a new payments provider that is going to plug into the UK's payment infrastructure, like if you say that in a party, people will tell you you're crazy. And Tom did that again at Monzo, so we're going to start a bank, and the reaction is naturally, well, that's not possible. Like, I mean, here's all the reason why this is going to fail. And I've heard the same thing with Duffel. We're competing against 3 legacy providers that have been around for many decades. And everybody's reaction was, there's no way you're going to get the partnerships with the airlines and nobody's going to want to use your products. And the biggest lesson I got from GoCardless was, yes, have an idea of the big picture of what you want to do, but then just focus on the next milestone and just build momentum by taking very, very small step toward that bigger objectives. And obviously you really have to have that hustle and not take no for an answer attitude. Otherwise you don't get there.
It's funny, I've heard that before, kind of taking the big mission and then breaking it down into those bite-sized chunks. That's an awesome learning. And do you think that learning was one of the reasons that led to so many entrepreneurs being kind of born from those early days? Because so many of them have gone on to start up companies, right? You mentioned the people that started up Dependabot, Palmutive, etc. Not only these huge fintechs, but there's also some really sizable startups that were also started off the back of it. Why do you think so many entrepreneurs were born from those early days?
I mean, that's one thing GoCardless did incredibly well. They just hired entrepreneurs. You could tell these people were going to want to start something eventually. And so when you start a team of entrepreneurs and you kind of nurture that environment where eventually they all go on to doing other things.
So do you feel like GoCardless is what gave you that entrepreneurial itch? Or do you think you had that kind of entrepreneurial itch beforehand?
I definitely had it beforehand. And I would say that GoCardless, made it 100 times bigger than it was, but it was there. Like, it opened the doors to what I thought was possible. What pre-GoCardless wouldn't have thought that starting a company in the travel industry is possible. And so I probably would have limited my options. And I think my experience at GoCardless really told me, you can pretty much do anything. Doesn't matter the industry, as long as you like approach it in the right way, anything is game. Yeah. I just saw it happen, and I saw the people that created GoCardless do it elsewhere as well. And so I don't want to say it's a like massive like confidence booster, but it just gives you that belief that it's possible.
You didn't just have entrepreneurial experiences in the past, and you weren't just being entrepreneurial at GoCardless, but you were also creating a side project that was called Next Weekend, right? And as I understand it, this was quite common at GoCardless, right? So can you tell me more about Next Weekend, like how the idea came about?
Yeah, so I was very good friend with a guy at GoCardless that was heading the business development teams. Nabil is now at Palantir, and we spent a lot of time together, just like looking at ideas and stuff. And eventually he left GoCardless to join Palantir, and we had this idea of this weekend getaway generator with a few other friends. We were just trying to, put something together to have fun and solve our own problems. And when we were working on that project, very naively, I thought that accessing all of the inventory was going to be super easy. As we worked for GoCardless, I knew Stripe, Twilio, and all of these other companies, and there was no way travel wasn't going to be the same. And well, it turns out that travel was very much different in that you couldn't just sign up to a service and access an API that gave you flights data and then make it possible for you to book it.
That's the seed that started your idea around Duffel. How long from like next weekend to exiting GoCardless to start Duffel? What was the time period?
So probably a year and a half between the idea and leaving GoCardless, and then another almost a year before starting Duffel. I didn't have such a great ambition. I just wanted to move to different countries and stay there for a little while. And I started with Uganda for personal reasons. I had already kind of planned to go to Tanzania and do Kilimanjaro. And believe it or not, 10 days in the trip, got invited to this party at the French embassy and met my partner who was working at the embassy at that time. And so I went to Tanzania, came back to Uganda and decided to stay there for almost a year and a half. And I started Duffel from Uganda.
Wow. So you went to Uganda with nothing, right? You just had a pot of savings, I guess, and you went to live there with your mum at the time. You met your other half in Tanzania, and then you came back to Uganda and kind of settled down for a little bit, right?
So I met my partner in Uganda 10 days after I arrived. And then I had already booked Tanzania. So I went to Tanzania. But then after Tanzania, I was like, I really liked her. So I'm going to come back to Uganda and then spend more time together. And that turned what was supposed to be a few weeks ended up being a year and a half.
Oh, wow. And so what were you doing when you were in Uganda? Like, so before Duffel was started?
So initially, my big plan was to visit Uganda and visit other countries in Africa. But after a few months, I could feel you start having all these ideas, and I had plenty of free time. I had my laptop with me, obviously. I got really into machine learning and deep learning, and I really wanted to understand it more. So I signed up for this Udacity course, self-driving car engineering. Kind of considered whether I should pursue a career in that, and just become a software engineer for like deep learning. But I felt maybe I would be like out of my depth compared to other engineers that have been doing that for a much longer time and much smarter than I ever will be when it comes to math and everything. I decided to, I think it was October, so almost like 10 months after I had arrived in Uganda, I decided to restart some old side projects, and one of them was Next Weekend. And I was thinking, like, it's been 2 years, somebody must have solved that problem, and it wasn't the case. So I just started digging into the industry, and I did what I do best, which is just read annual reports from global distribution system, OTAs. Duffel got started.
It's an amazing story. And when you started, you also decided to start in stealth mode. Why was that?
So not initially, we weren't actually. Initially, we create a website and create documentation for the API and publish it online. When we went into YC and raised our seed round, one of the investors that joined at the time was Michael Moritz, who is a partner at Sequoia. And we had this enlightening conversation about speed, the advantage of speed at startup and stealth. After that, we made the decision to switch to stealth mode. And
right, okay, got you. And so when you said, going back a little bit, because I think I skipped a step here, you were reading loads and loads of books, right? And we haven't really dug into the detail of like, what did all of that research yield? What was the result? What did you see?
The reading was really to immerse myself in the industry and to like really understand all of the actors. Why do they matter? Why do they not? What's the state of the technology? I wanted to feel like I had been in the industry for 10 years without having been in the industry for 10 years. So really catch up on everything that's happening and why it's the way it is. I think it's important to understand the development of industries and products. And doing that, eventually I opened up a door that led to a new standard, a new protocol for accessing airline reservation system, which was called NDC, New Distribution Capability. And for just so you have the background, so the way all the online travel agencies and large corporate travel agencies and retail travel agencies work today is that they get the inventory from airlines and are able to book it via what's called the global distribution system. So there are three companies, free GDS, free global distribution system, Amadeus, Sabre, and Travelport. They are the companies that you don't know about, like, I don't know, Fiserv in finance, the kind of infrastructure that sits below everything else. And these companies had been here for a very long time, started by the airlines, actually. The industry got computerized super early, and all the tech was built in the like these 80s. It was the way the software was designed was very old school, and it was all built on top of binary protocol called EDIFACT, which is the ADI standard is used in many, many industries. Now we talk about JSON and XML, and even XML is kind of a bit old school. It introduced a bunch of limitations for the airlines that they were essentially starting to get fed up with, the technical limitations of these GDS. And they all came together and decided we need to build a new protocol, a new standard for accessing our reservation system. This initiative was spearheaded by IATA, the International Air Transport Association, so the kind of big organization of the airlines. And I found this one page on their website during all of my research about this new protocol and what they were trying to do and the few airlines that were supporting it. And there were some big names, big airlines, but the number was very limited. I knew I wanted to start that platform for accessing travel content, like API first, developer first, but I had no idea how to access the airline reservation system, either that going through the existing middlemen, which felt like it was a bit of an odd choice. That was the opening, that was the lever that we could use in order to access airline reservation system. And I reached out to a bunch of airlines, and then that's how we got started.
Because you're rebuilding the entire kind of reservation system, because you're actually connecting directly into the airlines rather than using the existing system that these airlines have built centrally, right?
Yeah. So it's a bit of a like mixed world today, because the airlines have inventory system, reservation systems on their end, and then the GDS have, I guess, also records of what's happening in the airline system.
Yeah.
And we do something similar, except that we connect to the airlines through a much richer access. So we can do a lot more things than what's possible through the GDS due to that new API standard. So things like seats, bags, and all of the things that you would typically do on the airline system or on the airline website are very hard to do through this GDS, because it wasn't built for that. It was built for one passenger in one seat. I mean, actually, I'll give you a very good example. I'm kind of simplifying things a little bit, but essentially, infants are treated as bags in an airline system. So if you have an infant on lap, it's technically like a bag. Like, again, I'm simplifying, but it's to show you like how like the system really wasn't built for anything other than putting like a passenger on a plane, and not like buying Wi-Fi access and lounge access and wanting extra luggage capacity. Like, it wasn't built for that. And that new protocol helps with that.
When these large companies had first heard about Duffel, how did they react?
The airlines?
Not only the airlines, but more so the competitors, right?
The competitors, yes. I mean, they mostly didn't care, because the three of them own 95% of the third-party distribution market, or something ridiculous like that. They've been around. Sabre was started in the 60s, Amadeus in the 80s, and Travelport probably around the same time. They've been around for decades. They have all the relationships with the airlines, all the relationship with the travel agents, and nobody has ever threatened them in any way. And so when we came out, a bunch of people that have no knowledge whatsoever of the industry, that are making bold claims about developer experience matters and we make like really, really simple APIs. They're just like, sure, like whatever.
I want to go back to YC. You mentioned that you guys started at YC, and we know that Y Combinator is the most competitive incubator in the world. So you must have set out a vision, a mission, and a plan. How did you get into YC? Tell us more about that story.
So just when we started the company, we applied for YC straight away and we got rejected. I mean, straight away. They were like, no, yeah, you don't have enough traction. And plus it's a late application, so we want to see a bit more. It wasn't my first time applying to YC. Bill and I were like actually weren't working together on the reboot of Next Weekend and what became Duffel. He was at Palantir. We applied to YC, got rejected, and then a couple of months passed. We managed to get American Airlines on board. I think we get British Airways as well. You're kind of building momentum. We had test access to their environment, and there wasn't like full production mode, but we were like starting to be able to build a product and design the first version of the API. And we reapplied for the summer 18 batch and eventually got in. Obviously, GoCardless is a YC company as well, so we had a lot of help from the kind of GoCardless founders. We actually like tanked our interview. We were trying to prove many things at the same time. Like YC, they call you if you're accepted into the program, or they send you an email if you're not accepted. And so the whole time, just a funny man being like, just like, please, let's make it so that we get the phone call. And eventually we got that call and I was like, fuck. And yeah.
That must have been such an intense experience. I caught, when you talked about working with British Airways early days and getting traction with British Airways, that must have been a crazy experience, right? Because a couple of guys coming along and going to a massive behemoth of an airline and saying, can we play around with your technology and figure out what we can do with it and how we can make it better? How did you do that? How did they trust you?
So the first airline was American Airlines.
Right.
I remember emailing them like a bunch of times. There was no number like to call. Like if you go on LinkedIn and search for American Airlines employees, like hundreds of thousands, they all have very like non-descriptive names most of the time, titles, analyst for what, and we're like, no idea. So we had that email that was somewhat of a mailing list for the people in charge of that NDC standard or that new protocol within American and this new set of APIs. And so we just emailed them like what we were doing, and then eventually like one person reply, and we had one call and then other calls, and they unlocked access to their test environments. Initially, they just wanted to see kind of what we had in mind and what we were planning on doing. American Airlines was very forward thinking in that respect, and quite not as adverse to risk as other airlines we've worked with. If it wasn't for them giving us access, I don't think the rest of the story would have unfolded in the same way. And so we went to B and said, hey, look, like American Airlines has given us access. Why don't you do the same? They trust us. You should trust us as well. And eventually you got access to British Airways test system. And then you like kind of, that's the snowball, right? And then we managed so American Airlines, unsurprisingly, was the first airline we went to production with. It was a year and a half later.
And you guys have built up a ton of momentum. And again, it all started from YC, right? So after you applied to YC, you got in, you go through this batch. Can you tell us about how it kind of snowballed from there?
So we did YC and ended up raising a seed round a few days before demo day. So we ended up not presenting at demo day. And went back to London and started building the team. And mostly what we needed was engineers. Fortunately, we had a network of engineers. So reached out to them and got Alan, who was, funnily enough, the first engineer at GoCardless and first employee at GoCardless, to also join Duffel as the first engineer and first employee. So went on. So went on that journey again, and he's still with us today. And then I hired a bunch more engineers, and initially was all product and supply. We just needed to build the API and get more airlines on board. And we spent a lot of time just ultra focused on that. I would say until end of 2020, really, we were like very much like deeply focused on that. And then beginning of 2021.
That was like 4 years from when you guys started in 2016 to building product and supply with all of these engineers. And in that 4-year period, you had raised a seed round of how much?
We raised almost $5 million, like 4.7 or 4.8 million. And well, it was actually less time than that. So we started November 17.
Okay.
And then I'd say like, yeah, until this November, December 2020. So 3 years really was all product and supply. And so we raised that seed round from a few investors, some in summer 18. We raised the Series A from Benchmark in April 2021, a Series B from Index in July 2021. So a couple of months after. They were both announced like a bit after, but we so that was all. That period was fundraising, building up the team, and delivering product on airlines.
What must have been really scary during that time was you built up product and supply, and then you were probably, it sounds like you were just about to go for the demand side and COVID hit, right? So you were just about to look at, for people that don't know about the travel industry, OTAs, online travel aggregators like Skyscanner, etc. You were just about to go for those individuals for the demand side, and COVID hit. So that must have been like really mentally challenging as well. Tell us more about that time.
Yeah, so we launched the API at the end of 2019, like in private beta with a few travel agents. We were happy. Like he was just launched the product. All the perspective insights are amazing. We had a great team, lots of capital, and product was finally out. And a couple of months after, just COVID hit, the restrictions and travel started to plummet down. It was, I think, it was. I mean, I would be lying if I said it was an easy 2 year, but also like we've been incredibly lucky because we obviously had a lot of capital when the pandemic hit, and the team was still fairly small. In end of 2019, maybe like 20 people or something. So, you had to raise like $56 million in capital, 20 people on the team. So plenty of runway. But we just couldn't really focus on demand. And so we ended up saying, well, like we just have to get the product in a much better place. We actually we had some doubts as to whether the airlines would be open for business. But past the summer, we found that the teams we were interacting with, the distribution team and the teams around this new standard, had been maintained mostly, like not furloughed or, and that they had a lot more bandwidth to give us because nobody was like trying to connect to airlines at that point. It actually helped a lot. We signed new contracts and got a lot of new airlines integrated during that period. So it turned out pretty well for us.
And during that time, I want to kind of focus on you a little bit. It must have been because reading the Atomico European State of Tech, one of the biggest things that people struggle with, founders, is two things: mental well-being during COVID, because of course, you're starting an exciting company and you're in the midst of it in an office, motivating your people, etc. To having to be at home. How did that affect you mentally, the COVID?
Yeah, I'm very much an office person. Like it's not just about office. Like I don't really care about the office, but it's more like being with people. And again, like to your point, when you're on that exciting mission and you're like building that momentum, it's so much easier to do it in person. So I really struggled quite a lot with that, transitioning from a developing leader, because I'm very new, and I still am, but definitely more back then, very new in that leadership role. And the team was growing, and you're trying to find your footing with people in person, and suddenly you have to manage everything from a Zoom window, and that was really tough. The company also grew quite a lot. We were 20 maybe when it started to 80 now, so, double year on year for the last 2 years. And it's been painful. I mean, I'm very fortunate that my partner Julie at home is incredibly supportive. I mean, she works as well, and we had a baby during the pandemic, but we've managed to kind of make it all work. And I think without that, like I yeah, wouldn't have been able to like go through it. But she's been like super supportive, and obviously the team as well, the leadership team at the company, we've all tried to like kind of rally together and help each other. But yeah, it's tough.
Being an entrepreneur is like really hard already. Being an entrepreneur in the travel space during COVID makes it even harder. And of course, you have to demonstrate a huge amount of resilience, right? So how did, just for the sake of other founders out there that, you know, may be struggling mentally or motivating their teams or whatever it is, what's your kind of big recommendation? How did you deal with it?
I mean, the big thing I think is you have to take care of yourself first. So, and you know, it's the pyramids of the basics, right? But eating well, sleeping well, exercising as much as you can. And I'm not a zealot. Like I would love to claim that I like do it like every day, every week, flawlessly, and like never skipping a beat. It's not true, but for the most part, I managed to keep to that schedule. Like sports, for instance, is one thing where I do not compromise. I do it during the day, and it's very easy, for like meetings to take over, not go to the gym and take that meeting because it's more important. But then it becomes a rule and you do it all the time. Being very strict and deliberate about the investment in yourself is probably the foundational piece. And then just making sure you're very, very well supported by the people around you. I think if the people around you are like making you more stressed or stressed, like it's not going to help. So like finding like these pockets of stress or anxiety, and then just making sure that they just go away.
It's really important, I think, personally, to make people aware that although entrepreneurship looks glamorous, etc., it is very challenging. And all of us go through mental health challenges. How do you deal with that? We're not superhuman, right? So I wanted to dig into that a little bit. So thank you for sharing.
It's super brutal.
On that topic around kind of habits, on a schedule, etc., entrepreneurs generally tend to have like very intense lifestyle. So what does your day look like?
Yeah, the pattern of my day changes quite often. So for instance, like I don't have recurring invite going on for more than a quarter, because every quarter I try to reevaluate where I'm spending my time and the like times of one-on-ones and the format and other meetings, having a clean slate and structuring it again. Generally start around like 8:30. I don't exercise in the morning, have a small baby at home. I try to reserve my mornings as much as possible for doing work or thinking or reading, and again, it doesn't happen every day and it doesn't happen every week, but that's really like the time where I can think about the strategy of the company or what are the next things we need to do. And then afternoon is where I get most of my time booked, and interviews, one-on-ones, weekly meetings, and customer calls. I try to reserve lunchtime 3 times in the week to go to the gym. I finish work maybe around like 6:30, go back home, bath time with my son and dinner time and everything, and then usually starts working again after like around 9:30 for a few hours. But it varies like quite a bit.
Yeah, especially with kid at home, it's going to vary quite a lot, I can imagine. One of the things you said was on a quarterly basis, you're assessing your schedule, looking at recurring meetings, ensuring they're actually productive. In the mornings, you're doing the thinking, the strategy, etc. And then the afternoons doing potentially more the transactional stuff that you have to do with the business. And then the third thing I noticed was you mentioned that be very strict with your time around, fitness or things that, support your mental health. So it was 3 really interesting kind of glimmers of insight there. Thank you. Obviously, you had to grow from something like 20 employees to 80 employees during COVID. How was that transition?
I've learned over time, and I think I was too slow to realize, but what is crucial is the people you have around you. And so the leadership team, the people leading the different functions of the business is the most important piece of leadership in some ways. I can't do it on my own, and I'm really leaning a lot on them. We're starting to go back to the office. I found it like so much easier to lead in that setting, because you get the kind of informal time with people that you wouldn't get otherwise. And I think you like gather a lot of insight and knowledge about what's happening in the company that I wouldn't get otherwise. And at the same time, it gives me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts on what we're doing and how things are progressing, and that tissue of the company that is not necessarily going through many layers of reporting, but actually direct is incredibly valuable. There are new lessons all the time. It's definitely a big learning curve and learning process. I'm enjoying it a lot. I love the business. I love the people that we have in the company. I love working with our customers and partners. So when you have that, it makes it a whole lot easier.
What's the big mission for Duffel over the next 5, 10, even 20 years?
Yeah, our vision is really that travel should be a lot more effortless and seamless. If you compare to other experiences that we have now, when it's ride sharing or food delivery or super simple app based, you see the world is just in there and it's very easy, and the transaction is very easy. Don't know when was the last time you booked a trip. It's a whole ordeal, right? You're piecing together different suppliers, different providers, trying to understand where you can go and how you can go, and you have the flights, the hotels, the transfers. There's just so many pieces to a trip, and when things go wrong because you've done the stitching yourself, then you are the one person that has to. If your flight is delayed, then you need to update your train time or your ride sharing time in and out, and if your baggage is lost, you have to sit in a stupid queue at the airport to write on a piece of paper where you're going next, which is obviously the hotel that I booked online. Why can't you know that somehow? It's all of these things make the experience a lot more frustrating and painful than it can be. And our vision is that we want that to be seamless and effortless. And the way we're going to unlock that is rewriting the kind of core infrastructure that underpins the travel industry. We said we want to make travel programmable. Everything should be driven by APIs so that we give the Lego blocks so that entrepreneurs and developers and companies can stitch them together in order to create these seamless experiences. And we see that as the big barrier to our vision today, the fact that the tech is so ancient.
When you were saying the baggage thing about your baggage getting lost, I actually got anxiety. Because I lost my baggage twice. I just felt this massive pain in my chest. I was like, so completely get it. I think effortless travel is an amazing vision, and I'm rooting for you guys in the background. It's just an awesome vision, and I think if you can achieve all of that and actually be able to kind of remove almost or change the domino effect of all of these things, such as the baggage being lost, etc., it's going to completely transform the industry. One last question: what's the big mission for Steve personally? What do you want to achieve?
Learning, really. I think that's what it comes back to. Just grow as a person, as a dad, as a leader. I just want to learn like everything that I can learn. That's my big thing.
Awesome. Well, Steve, thank you. It's been amazing to have you on the podcast. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you've gained value from this episode, please drop us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a like on YouTube. See you for the next one.